Welcome to the Cloak and Dagger podcast. On this podcast, we'll be talking about freeform show Cloak and Dagger. Here are your hosts, Kat and Butch.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cloak and Dagger podcast. My name is Kat, and I am here with my amazing co-host, Butch.
And how happy are you that you don't have to watch a whole show and take all the notes that you took for every episode of Cloak and Dagger?
I'm sad. I am sad. You know, I was going over the notes that we made for this show, and I was like, I don't have anything to look at. I had to kind of like scan back through everything we've been through. So we did not get a new episode of Cloak and Dagger for this week, but as you guys know, we are doing hiatus episodes. So we will still be with you through the break. So the show will be back in spring of 2019. But here we are with our first hiatus episode. And today we're going to be going over a season recap. But instead of kind of going through the whole story that you guys have already been with us on this whole journey, Butch and I have put together some questions that we're going to ask each other. And we'll see what our thoughts are on the first season. All right, Butch, ready to go?
Sounds good.
First question
Let's do this.
you. All right, so comic book guy, are you happy with the balance of the original story content versus the comic book content in the show?
All right. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about what they changed for the show and what they added, what they took out. Just very quickly, what they added, the big thing I think that they added was they set the whole thing in New Orleans, as opposed to New York City, and obviously that's like a major change because you bring in all the stuff that with the survival with the people being strong survivors, with the mysticism, which we'll talk about later. That's all new to Cloak and Dagger. They changed the traditional roles of Cloak and Dagger to start with. In the comic books, we've talked about this before. Cloak is kind of poor, and Tandy's the rich girl running away from her family. And they swap things a little bit, with Tandy being homeless, and Tyrone being a little bit more well off. And they changed a lot of the origin of Cloak and Dagger. They took out, or they lessened the drug related stuff with their origin, and they changed it into something else that's comic book related. But for another version of Cloak and Dagger, the comics, they linked it to Roxxon and more of a science fiction based origin story for them. And yeah, so for me overall, compared to the comic books, it's different. At first, I wasn't too hot on the changes when I read about them. I'm like, we're doing that a lot. We're changing things, quote unquote, just to change them. You know, that happens.
Story, like this was your baby.
Yes, right. But although. Except for the New Orleans thing, like right away I'm like, ooh, I like that. Like that sounds, just to make it different from everything, from all the stuff with New York City. But you took away a lot of the social economic stuff that they dealt with. But then there's new stuff to deal with, and just to see a different side of that. And they can always go to New York in season 2 or whenever, right?
True.
Yeah. So overall, I was, as the season progressed, like I got to appreciate it. Like nothing really annoyed me anyway. Like I gave everything, I think, a fair chance. And as we went through the season, I found out, these people know what they're doing. And in the cases of like stuff like the costume, that's not the costumes. Sorry, for Dagger in particular. Like that's not a big deal. What's more important, obviously, is the character herself, and you can always do that later on. Like a lot of people were like bitching about like her. She has like this mark thing on her face. I'm sure you've seen that before in the comic version, and it's like it's just a mark, and it really doesn't have an explanation in the comic books either. And you can always just add that on later, or like suddenly she has a mark. Sure, why not?
So
you know?
it's not like if Harry Potter didn't have his scar. It's nothing
Oh,
serious like that.
that'd be bullshit. That'd be you'd riot.
Absolutely. So you're happy then.
Yeah, yeah. I was very, 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 very happy with the changes that they made.
And I like how you point out
It's,
how there was the role reversal, but then we just saw at the end of episode 10 how they kind of reversed roles in the show. So it kind of harkened back, I think, to the comics in that way at the very end of season 1 with Ty
yeah, a
and
little bit of
Church and Tandy going home.
yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's gonna be if you wanna see Tandy being at home, if that's like a big deal for you, there you go. Season 2, she'll be in a house.
That was the
Yay.
writer saying, "Just kidding, Butch." Here it is.
For all the geeks.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So, well, obviously you can't answer that question because you don't read the comic books. A question for you, like, so yeah, coming into the show, you did not know too much about the comic books, obviously, um, but what was your first impressions in the show? Were you surprised by the tone that they went for, coming from the fact that you know a lot way more than I do about the Freeform network?
Yeah, so what I knew about the comic books before the show was what I like Wikipedia'd before the show started. And then you kind of like fall in the Marvel rabbit hole of Wikipedia where they're like,
Oh yeah.
this is this version, but then this happened, and this happened, and here is this 700th version of this same storyline. And you're like, okay, well, clearly they have a whole bunch of storylines to choose from, so they could go a bunch of different places. From what I know about freeform shows, I know you were worried in the beginning that it was going to be on like a teen network. And I know you had worries of how Freeform was going to portray the characters. And I wasn't worried so much in that sense because I'd watched other Freeform shows and know the quality that they can bring to make a story about teenagers, but also make it relatable to an adult audience. So I think they really succeeded in that. I think they had a good balance of like, and I hate to use the light and the dark metaphors again, but they had a good balance of light. They had the humor, they had family bonding. There was a lot of bonding over food in the show. I was thinking about that today, like the family breakfast with Ty and his parents, and then even like cute scenes where like Detective O'Reilly and Fuchs were having pancakes. Like they had those lighter moments in the show, and they were
I had to bring that up.
I'm sorry. They had to go through, they brought young relationships into the show too. So like they had the high school setting. You did get to see like a normal high school kid life. So they had that, but they also had that balance of like darker, more adult topics, like the racial divides in our country currently. They brought in sexual assault. They brought in drug addiction. So maybe not like how they did in the comics, but they certainly brought a drug aspect into the show. I think out of anything that surprised me the most of how they actually had Tandy, doing the drugs on the show. Yeah. I was surprised to see that. But it was, part of her storyline. So they went for it in that sense. They even went to suicidal ideations. So they brought
they brought
all of that darker stuff in. And I think that they had that really good balance where the tone of the show was not like too deep all the time, but it still gave you that sense that, okay, this is based off of a comic and this is on a network that has like young adult shows, but this is certainly not, like a teenager show. This is something that has more depth and more seriousness to it. And I think they really did that justice with the storylines that they had. So would you agree on that? Because I know, again, you were worried about that coming into the show. Were you happy with the tone?
Oh, absolutely. I was really, it's still, I said this earlier on our season, I can't believe this is happening in a universe with a talking raccoon and giant like Paul Rudd like riding on a truck, and it's just weird that you'd have like these kinds of scenes with, like, Mina mentioned something about edibles. I'm like, edibles. She said
Yeah,
edibles.
that's
Did you say
true.
edibles?
Yeah, I mean, they
This is the
really
Marvel
did.
universe.
They went for it, and I don't think that it was distasteful when they did, especially bringing up really touchy subjects
Right.
like the racial divide in this country currently, and um,
Yes.
even sexual assault, because that's a big deal going on in this country right
Yeah.
now too. So they went for it with those topics, and they did it tastefully, and they were able to have that discussion without making it a focal point, especially of Ty's storyline, but not having
Right.
that be all he's about, because he's so much more of a person than just that. So I think that they did a really good job with that. They also were able to bring in the voodoo culture, which I thought was so cool because, like you said, this show is based in New Orleans, and that is a big part of New Orleans culture and history. So to bring that in, and definitely that wasn't something that was part of the comics. So bringing that in, I thought was a really cool touch. And again, showing, doing that tastefully, but not making it like such a focal point, but really tying that into the whole story. And then they also brought in, the fact that Ty goes to a Catholic school. So they brought in Catholicism as well, but it wasn't like overbearing. It wasn't like they even sat through a mass, and you're not like, your focus wasn't necessarily Father Delgado giving the mass. It was, Ty, all the kids are on their phones texting each other, and Ty and Avita are having a conversation.
Yeah.
So the heaviness that Christianity can bring to things, they still were able to lighten that up with like even like the smallest touches of the scenes with the stained glass, kind of representing hope, but then also having the church being a sort of a sanctuary, even if it was, the fact that they were only living there because, or that Tandy was only living there for most of the season because she was homeless. So they were kind of able to bring in that mystical and religious side of things too, without being overbearing. So I think the tone of the show, they did a really good job on it from a writing standpoint.
Absolutely. And anyway, the religion stuff, I know somebody complained about it. Some people complained about it on Twitter, and that's part of the comic books. If you want it to be a faithful translation, that's part of the original property. And yeah, you're right. Compared to the comic books, it's not as big of a thing, I think, the way they presented it. So it was really well done.
Yeah, and then just to throw in another aspect of tone of the show too, and we'll talk about music later, but the overall sound, the way the show was filmed, the lighting, it's just everything was so, especially from that standpoint, I think they did such a good job of pulling everything together, because they do have to transport you into a world where you have to have a suspended disbelief and a leap of faith that these people have powers and this thing is actually happening. To pull you into like a world of somebody's mind, like you have to have the acting, of course, but you have to be able to have that cinematography to match it, so that as an audience you're still drawn into what you're watching. And I think they did a fabulous job, especially in the hope and fear sequences. Like, those were really, really well done. They could have been really cheesy, and I don't think that they were.
Absolutely, for sure. I just don't understand why it's a forest. That's my thing. Like, and it's not. I don't have any problem with forests, but it's like, I wish they explained it. Like, it would have been interesting if like they had some sort of connection to that, or maybe they will in the second season.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting? It's like a forest of all things. Ooh, forest of the mind.
Like something that they were familiar with. No, you're right. And maybe like they did start getting, as they got their powers more under control, they did start getting into scenery, like into actual places. So maybe just they had no idea where they were at first, so that was something that was familiar to both of them, maybe.
Forest of the Mind. I like it.
Yeah, let's just go with Forest of the Mind.
It sounds deep. I like it.
Yeah. All right, another question for you. We are going to get into discussing powers specifically more in depth on another episode, and that will be coming up very soon. But Butch, are you happy with how their powers were portrayed, both for Cloak and Dagger in this season, as they discovered these powers?
Dude, that was awesome. I like the mix that they did. Like they didn't show all the powers. They left some of Cloaks and Dagger's powers on the table for season 2, I guess. And I was really surprised that they showed us as much as they did when we were talking about episode 10 when Cloak sucks in Connors. I was not expecting that. Like for the last episode.
Cool. I mean,
that was really cool.
That was really cool.
And I'm like, oh wow, that's Cloak, and I thought this would be like a season 2 thing. And Dagger, she got to throw her knives, and that for me was like the checklist for what I wanted to get done by season 1. Like just get her to throw the daggers, and everything else that can come with time. But the big thing that they changed or they added on to was the hopes and fears thing.
Mm-hmm.
That it makes sense from the comics because kind of, especially with Cloak, because whenever Cloak would suck people into his cloak in the comics, you'd see the audience, you'd see their greatest fear, and it was always like a quick thing in the comic books, like for 1 or 2 panels you'd see whatever fear they'd have, and they'd run out of fears pretty quickly that they could show, so you'd eventually just get whatever werewolves or monsters. But here they did the same thing with Tandy, like like she can see hopes, and they added interesting wrinkles to that by making it so that they have to touch the person. So that's a very good limiting thing to the powers, so it's not too crazy. And the last thing that they added was the concept of them not being able to touch each other.
Yeah.
And again, that's totally not in the comics. And when they added that, I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting little wrinkle added to the drama. We got powerful scenes directly, because of that twist that they added. How did you feel about that? I know, I'm sure of course you knew what their powers were coming into the season, but so the hopes and fears thing was a surprise to both of us, I guess. So did you like that they added that wrinkle and that they spent a lot of time on those scenes?
Yeah. So let me start that thought off with a question for you. So in the comics, the fears took place when he pulled somebody into his cloak, and it would just be like a collection of all of their fears. It wouldn't be something specific.
It depends. Sometimes they'd all have the same fear for some reason.
Okay.
It's the same space, and Dagger would come in, and Dagger could see the fears too, but we never saw the hope thing with Dagger.
Really? Okay. So if I got pulled in there, I would just be like in a cave full of spiders falling over me, and it'd be awful. Gotcha. Even if it had nothing to do with where I was
think
going.
I'd be there with you.
Yeah.
I think I'd be there with you. We'd have the same. In that case, we'd have the same one.
So the hopes and the fears were actually like one of my favorite parts of their powers. Like having light daggers, super cool. She learned how to control them very expertly. That was awesome. How she got to have those cool fight scenes, and definitely being able to like do the teleportation. Great power, but to explore the hopes and the fears is such a psychological ability. And those have always been like that mind control thing, and not even a mind control, but just having that ability to really get into somebody's head is so interesting to me, because that's scary. Think of how much you can control, and look what we saw Tandy do when she realized that. She was able to go into people's heads, see their hopes, and then steal them for herself and use that as a drug. So that's terrible. I mean, she made Mina kill B. Arthur. Not to bring up all the terrible stuff that happened over season 1. But I just really liked how with their powers, how they didn't know how to do everything right away. Because I think that would have been really hard to explain. And I don't know how that progressed in the comic book.
Yeah.
Could they just do everything right away in the comic books?
Pretty much. Didn't take them long.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Dagger was she first appearance, she was doing crazy things with her daggers.
Yeah, so like Tandy didn't even really know that she had light daggers until So obviously the powers were controlled until Ty and Tandy met again, and they kind of like, I guess, activated them when they touched, when they met again.
Yeah,
And that's when they
sounds
were
right.
able to start doing stuff again. So like, she didn't know that she could do the dagger thing until she was being assaulted. And,
Yeah.
Ty didn't know that he could teleport until he tried to go to bed and ended up on a roof. So, like, I just thought that was really neat.
Very
how,
stressful.
Yeah, right. I thought it was neat how they, like, slowly introduced things. And I know that was, a critique of the show that things progressed a little slowly, but they're teenagers. And, like, they have rough lives, and then they have these crazy powers on top of them. Like, and nobody to talk to about it except each other, and they don't even really know who each other is. So I like how they didn't really get it at first. I mean, look at Tandy had to try to kill herself to get control over her powers,
Yeah.
which was pretty extreme, but
Yeah.
that's Tandy. That's what she had to do. So I liked I respected that in the show because again they are asking us to assume a level of a leap of faith, and I don't
Yeah.
think that I could have bought if they just even if they touched and then that's how they activated their powers again. I don't think I would
Right.
have bought it if they could just automatically do everything right off the bat.
Absolutely. I like that. It, there was definitely that progression there, and
Hmm.
you could see the direct effect of in particular, the hopes and fears thing.
Yeah.
Like it gave or it gives the writers more space to play with, and
Yeah.
that's what we got through the season. We explore. Oh, suddenly they're both using the parts at the same time, and
Hmm.
now they're in the same space. They can talk, and it was so gradual. And oh, now Dagger can steal the hopes, and even moving forward, you can play around with so many things, and like
Yeah.
Cloak is like holding doors closed and keeping people stuck in there, and what Dagger did at the very end to Scarborough, I love that. Like
Oh, that was
it gives
good. Yeah.
more space and more depth. I think instead of just throwing daggers and fighting crime, and these cool traditional superpowers, like
Yeah.
suddenly there's a level that you
Well,
can
and it
go
gives you
that the
that
writers can take us.
connection too, because anybody can imagine their own hopes and anybody can imagine their own fears. So you can get into
Right.
those scenes and those sequences when
Yeah.
you're looking at hopes and fears. I mean, not anybody is going to be in a situation where they're having light daggers thrown at them and they're being teleported by somebody. So having that connection to reality, I think was really good to build on for the show. So I really enjoyed the hopes and fears aspect of things.
Right. And you mentioned that there were criticisms about how slow the show developed, and we heard a lot of that, especially with the first first few episodes.
Yeah.
So coming from someone who's not. I guess what I'm saying is from in the comic books, obviously everything has to happen fast
Yeah.
because you have such a small amount of space and you come out every month, so you gotta get going.
Right.
What about what did you feel that the episodes were slow, even considering that they gave us the first two episodes basically in 1 week? Um, how did you feel about that? And I don't know, would you have wanted like a longer season maybe? Because we only got 10 episodes.
Yeah. So I guess if you're looking at it from a comic book standpoint, I can understand how people think that the show was slow for sure because, like we said, they were just discovering each other, they were discovering their powers. It took them more than half the season to really kind of get with their
Meet?
powers, right? Um,
Right.
right. It did take them a long time to meet, but I think and I don't have a problem with it. So I understand the criticism, but I'm not a person who has that critique of the show. So I think that in order to
Right.
really get a sense of who Tyrone and Tandy were, so somebody who didn't know them at all. So somebody like me coming in, I don't know anything about these characters. In order to
Right.
really know them and get who Tyrone and Tandy are as separate people, we had to appreciate where they came from, where
Hmm.
they started, to really get the journey that they both had over the course of the season. So I think that if they had put them together too quickly, we would have seen them only as an entity together. It would have just been Tyrandy the entire time, which I'm not complaining about Tyrandy, but I don't think we would have gotten to appreciate both Tyrone and Tandy independent from one another and really see how far they went over the first season, how much they grew as people. And and we talked about it, we talked about it before on maybe our last episode or the episode before. Their story progression is different, but they both still have a progression. So Tandy was kind of an erratic character where she would be like up and down and up and down and up and down. So it was easy to pay attention to her changes because they were so prevalent. Whereas Tyrone was kind of more like a slow burn character. So he was, kind of steady. He would have little ups, little downs. And then towards the end of the season was really when he started to make his positive changes. So, he had to me, he had one big dive and maybe two big ups. So he had the big up, the big dive, and then he went back up again. Whereas Tandy, like I said, was just up and down the whole season. So I don't think that we would have appreciated...
I love that you're making the hand gestures.
Yes.
Yeah, so
that's
watch on YouTube, guys.
Muscle, yeah.
YouTube exclusive. And your shirt, too, by the way.
My Cloak and Dagger shirt. So I've got my Cloak and Dagger shirt on that my husband got me. Thank you. So I don't think we would have appreciated their full journey, especially Ty, because he had such... I don't want to... It's not fair to say that he took a backseat to Tandy. I think that a better way to say what I want to say is that it was more noticeable for her. And I think Ty's story would have gotten lost if we didn't have that separation between the two of them in the beginning. And
interesting, yes.
I guess it's fair to say that we really didn't have them working fully together in maybe a comic book sense until like the very end of episode 10, where they like actually used maybe in
their powers together.
Yeah, maybe in episode 7 where they went into Ivan Hess's mind was where we really started to see it.
Hallway fight.
Right, but 10 was
that wasn't real though.
Yeah, that was real enough. That was episode 10 was when they really, you could both see that they both had a handle on what they were doing. Well, not even really, because Ty learned what he could do at the very end of the episode when he pulled Connors into dark. So
that dark force, but he was doing like crazy, like interesting things there with like I like the he did like this one move where he like teleported in front of one of the terrors and tripped the terror, like the terror was like running.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's cool. So it's, whenever they find a way for him to not be bait, it's a cool thing, I think.
Yeah, and I also think that the slowness of the first couple of episodes allowed us to really explore more of the secondary characters in the show who we really fell in love with these characters. So we got to learn about where Ty came from. We got to learn about where Tandy came from. So I think that some of the more impactful things later on in the season, for example, when we found out that, Tandy's dad wasn't everything he appeared to be, I don't think that would have been such a big deal if we didn't get to learn about Tandy on her own and how much she wanted to be like her dad.
For sure.
I don't think that would have been as impactful.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Everything had more impact because of the not the delay. Sorry, the time that they took to develop the story.
Yeah.
Like
and
even
we probably
even just
got less Billy scenes, and that would have been sad because that was such a huge part of Ty's life. And he said that his struggle his whole life was he thought he had to be two people. He thought he had to be him and Billy. And that wouldn't have meant as much to us as an audience if we didn't get to learn about what Billy meant to Ty. So I appreciated the separation between the two for as long as it occurred. And then to continue on to learn about their actual, them actually as people instead of just their superhero personas.
That's true. Like I feel like I would have like I would have wanted something structured differently, but
Yeah.
what we got I appreciate because like you said, everything has more weight.
Yeah.
Uh, just killing the bee, like how like the amount of empathy that you get for a stupid bee. Like
Right.
on any other show, it's like, oh, it's just a bee. But this one's like Bee Arthur. They named it. Never named something
No,
that might
right.
die.
It's like so like got me.
Yeah, and then at the end, mayhem with like another killing of a bee. I'm like, oh, she's a
Yeah.
villain. Like, if you hurt the bees, you're a bad person.
And we wouldn't have gotten all those little things if they had rushed the story. Now, did I want a longer season? This one was hard for me to think about. I think that yes, but not like 10 more episodes. I think I would have taken maybe one or two. Like make it 12 episodes because I feel like the last episode was rushed and I don't think that they were able to do everything they wanted to do. And maybe if they had two more extra episodes to kind of draw that out, we would have gotten to see more like fight scenes instead of, I think you put it best when you said they did like music montages. And I think that that was cool, but for people who wanted to see them like fighting and using their powers, I think we would have gotten more of that plus story if they had two more episodes. So if it was 12 instead of 10. But I'm happy with the 10 that we got for sure.
Right. I would have, yeah, I would have wanted at least like the last episode. I would have made it like 2 episodes, and
Yeah.
I keep thinking of I would have compressed episodes 2 and 3, especially I don't know. Although it's hard because three I think confused
I
so
gotta
many
look back
people
at three.
because
I'm looking. You go
yeah
ahead and
because
talk. I'm looking back at my notes.
yeah episode 3 was the extended hopes and fears sequence
Oh yeah,
from
yes, yes, yes.
for most of the episodes. So that's the one that confused a lot of people, I think, because people were like wondering, is this a flashback? Like, what's happening?
Hmm.
And of course, their powers weren't explained at that point.
Yeah,
So I don't know. I would have done. I would have made 2 and 3 like one episode. 5 and 6, I think. 5 is like we're gonna talk about this in another podcast, but 5 is the one that I really didn't like. For me, it didn't move the story forward enough, I think. But so I would have wanted either more episodes or like compress a few episodes into one and then just use that space to give us a little bit more of like episode 8. Was it 8? Yeah, 8 I think was the one that was like stuffed with so much plot. And so I felt that there was a little bit of imbalance in this the structure of the season. Although that might be a good thing. Like you start slow, it's like a roller coaster and just go faster and faster.
yeah.
But yeah, the episode 8 was so busy, and 10 I would have wanted a lot more time dealing with this massive event. So
But it makes you
yeah,
wonder what they cut out because you know that they had like a million scenes that they had to cut out for time. So like, what did we miss?
right. Maybe there were 15 divine pairings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we didn't go through the entire divine pairing history.
Yeah, so yeah. I wonder. A lot of people on Reddit, of all places. I didn't see this on Twitter, but on Reddit, a lot of people were like, I don't like the divine pairing scenes in episode 10, in the sense that they felt like that it was messing up with the pacing of the show, and what they would have wanted would have been to move those to sprinkle those out throughout the season. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like I don't know if that would have made sense structure wise, right? But um, that would have been an option, and you could have used that space to put more stuff in episode 10.
Yeah, because like, what did I get out of those divine pairing things? Like, I really like Auntie, and I'm glad that we got to hear more from her. But what did I get out of
Yeah.
those? That the person who was gonna die always had some kind of mark or something on their arm,
Hmm.
and that um, this was part of the history of New Orleans, but that none of those other pairings had any kind of supernatural powers. Or not supernatural, but like superhero powers. So
Right.
then I was confused because then I had to try to process
Right.
that because I
Yeah.
guess maybe I'm the only one, but I guess I thought like going through everything that the other divine pairings of the past also had the same powers.
No, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had made that assumption and then we were shown that we were completely wrong, but we weren't shown that until episode 10 and I was kind of like, "Oh, well, okay." So this is the specific divine pairing that has superhero powers. Gotcha.
Right. They just died.
I mean, like the first divine pairing, well, that was. I mean, maybe if they would have had some superhero powers, it wouldn't have had to go like that. But
Yeah, like Aquaman. If she had Aquaman's powers,
so I just think
she'd
that
still be there.
I never thought about that. That's so like even if they would have put them over like the course of maybe like the last 3 episodes, then it
Oh
would have
yeah.
it would have made it, but yeah, I mean, I don't know that process at all of putting together a show, so I'm
Right.
sure that they did
Yeah.
it the way that it made sense, but it was that like that really threw me off that those other pairings did not have any powers, so I was kind of stuck on that, and I had to rewatch some parts because I realized that I was thinking about that too much and then missing what was going on, and since there was so much going on in that episode,
Mm,
like you had to pay attention to it, so
for sure.
yeah. So were you okay with the pacing of the show overall?
Overall, no, I'll say for the most part, yeah. Like I said, I think that's exactly what I'm saying is, I would have done it differently. I appreciate what they did, and yeah, coming even as someone who knows the characters,
Mm-hmm.
like they change enough so that you'd want to know more about like this particular version of Tandy and Tyrone, right?
Yeah.
So we got a lot of Tyrone being normal, and you pointed out earlier that how important that was, that we'd get Tyrone just being a normal kid, a normal high school kid. We'd have those scenes, and meanwhile, like especially in the earlier parts of the season, Tandy was sort of the one driving things forward, and Tyrone was doing his school thing. He was going at a different pace, and
Mm-hmm.
then towards the end,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thing. They had this space to do that, and towards the end, Tyrone sort of takes over with his story, and you had that switch of pace which you couldn't do if the whole thing was going quickly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an appreciation for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think they did what they could with the episodes that they had to deliver such an intense story.
Right.
So I have an important question for you about the villains of season 1, but real quick, we're going to take a break to hear from one of our sister podcasts.
Hey there, Cloak and Dagger fans. We are Abel, Andrew, and Adam from the Shadowhunters podcast.
If you're a fan of Shadowhunters, come and discuss the show with us every week. And during the hiatus, listen to our original content, including episode rankings, rip it or ship it, and character best and worst moments.
And if you haven't heard of Malik, you are truly not living your best life.
Check us out everywhere where podcasts are located. And thank you guys for listening. Enjoy your show.
Okay, we are back. So, villains, season 1, Roxanne and Detective Connors. Are you happy with those villains? Are there villains you would have rather have seen? Did I miss a villain?
Okay, so if you're coming from the comic books again, Roxanne exists in the Marvel universe,
Mm-hmm.
and this is gonna get the old original normal Marvel universe. Roxanne has nothing to do with Cloak and Dagger, all right? In the 2000 in the remake from a few years ago, they had everything to do with Cloak and Dagger, and Detective Connors, as far as I know, is brand new to the show. So, in that sense, I guess I was disappointed in the choice of villains because trying to think of it as, if let's say if you had like a movie, like the first movie, let's say Cloak and Dagger was a movie, and you had the first movie, would you want to have their version of their Doctor Doom or their Green Goblin in the first movie right away? Because that's Roxanne and Detective Connors is not that. So um, you wouldn't hit with the most impact, I think. But at the same time, the story that you're trying to tell is sort of like, do you remember the origin of Spider-Man, where he has like a burglar like steals something from someone, and he refuses to stop the villain, the burglar, and then the dude ends up killing his Uncle Ben.
Mm-hmm.
So that guy, nobody talks about that guy, right?
Right.
He's gone. He's not. He doesn't have like four extra arms sticking out of his sides, or like a cool alien symbiote, but he's essential to the origin of the character. So I think that's what we got with Roxanne and Detective Connors. That they're part of the journey. They're very important to Cloak and Dagger. Um, Tanya and Tyrone, but they're not fun. Like Roxanne's like a corporation. Scarborough's some asshole, some rich asshole. Detective Connors has no powers, as of the moment, and it's just like, again, if it was up to me, the first season would have been, Roxanne and Detective Connors for the first half, and the second half you bring in Mayhem or their other big villain, Mr. Jip. So that obviously that would have changed everything with the structuring of the show.
Yeah.
And so that's way easier said than done. Although, if you had a 20 episode per season, like a lot of other shows, you could do that. So that still, it still makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just weird that we have to go through this, because there's the way they structured it is, 10 episodes for 1 year. 1 year, you wait for a whole year before you get whatever Mayhem, the fantastic stuff, the stuff that I think would have been more interesting for people, especially coming from comics, right? Like,
Yeah.
The Connors is just a guy, and not whatever. That's not the selling point. You don't sell a series on JD Evermore's face. No offense, but it's like he's just an asshole. So Detective Connors, not JD. So yeah, that's the thing. I can see why they did it. I would have done something different, but that's me. How do you feel? Like, obviously you're not too beholden to the fantastic stuff, I guess, from the comic books. Were you okay with them going up against the big evil corporation and the corrupt cop?
I really liked the Roxanne aspect. I liked Ty's story with the corrupt cop, but I don't know, just like, I think if that was the only villain, I would have been disappointed, because then it would have felt more like a crime drama and not so much a superhero drama. So having like the big evil corporation kind of brings in, I don't know, like a hark to a superhero universe to me. But I like what you said about how, so like if you think of how they ended, and they kind of like teased Mayhem for like a little bit in episode 9. And then they flat out showed you what was going on at the end of episode 10. So that, like, Marvel kind of does that, like, stay till after the credits kind of thing. So, like, if you think of, like, the first, like, in the cinematic universe, like, if you think about the first Avengers movie, like, they didn't straight go up against Thanos in that movie, but they kind of, they had, like, an after credit scene of showing him, like, there's still more to come. So it was kind of like, here's what you got in this movie, but you're going to get a whole lot more, so you're going to be with us for the next 20 years. So I kind of think that, like, they set this show up in the same sort of fashion, where they were like, okay, Roxanne is bad, but then did they, like the very end of episode 10, she had the paper held up where it was like, Roxanne Roxanne was at fault, and then Peter Scarborough like stuck in his own mind coma. So, like, they might not even have anything to do with season 2.
Right, yeah.
They might be mentioned, but they might not be part of it. So then
That's true.
You carry over Connors, because he got sucked into the Dark Force dimension, so, like, he's got to come back at some point, right? So, like, maybe he'll get powers there.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I mean, like, he was such... You're right in saying, like, just flat out, he's such an asshole. But, like, so was Peter Scarborough. He was just, like, an asshole. And it's like, I kind of wanted somebody who was, like, not just an asshole, but like somebody who was like a villain because they were like
super asshole.
right, they were like inherently like just evil, and like that's all they did was be an evil villain, and that was like their whole life. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess like that was a realism to it, but like to me that was more of like a crime drama show, and I wanted that like super villain superhero mesh. And maybe we'll get that with Mayhem. I don't know anything about Mayhem, so I've got my earmuffs on about Mayhem.
Right. Sure.
Um,
One thing though, just related to the villains, I forgot to mention the terrors were sort of a villain
true.
for the show.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel about that? Because again, that has nothing to do with the comic books, and again, like you caught that really early on, and that they would go with that. I guess it's like a trope, I guess, at this point, like the zombie invasion.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because they could have gone without that, right? Like that's definitely just a choice that they made.
For sure. They definitely brought that in, and I don't know. I mean, it was cool because you got to see that they had some other like there was something else going on that they had to deal with. So they had their two asshole villains, and then they had like a whole bunch of like little things that they had to deal with too. Not that the terrorists were little things, but like it was causing like mass chaos in the whole city. So they had a whole bunch to deal with. And I guess if you're considering that, then the end of the season where they kind of like just dispersed everything, and then the problems just kind of all went away. Like they used their superhero-ness to solve a not superhero problem, I guess. I don't know how I feel about that.
Like,
but they were vigilantes in the comic books, right?
Yeah, they were more of against crime, I guess, and specifically drug-related crime.
Yeah.
Uh,
like they weren't using their powers to like go against, I don't know, like alien invasion from space. They weren't going against like somebody else who had superpowers as well, and they were the only ones who could fight this because they had the superpowers that could match it. So it was like they were using their superpowers to fight
like street crime.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. I guess
it's different.
Yeah.
I guess it had something to do also, just thinking about it right now, that I mean, when they added the whole prophecy thing with the divine pairings, you need like a big threat.
Yeah, exactly.
Because does that make sense? If the whole prophecy is there and you're just there to stop one superpower dude, it doesn't feel as epic as stopping. Because previously the previous pairings stopped war. They stopped what was it? The Spanish flu. They stopped famine.
Hurricane. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
they
suddenly
stopped the spread of the terrors.
Yeah, so that's
I guess that's
a big thing.
Spread through.
Yeah.
That would have spread through the entire world, probably. It would have been like a 28 days later sort of situation. So they were able to stop that like in the last 5 minutes of the show. See, that's like where my problem is. So like, you're building up this prophecy, the divine pairing. Like, they have to be the only ones to stop it. One's gonna die doing it, and then they were able to solve the problem so easily.
Like that.
Yeah. And then it was like, okay. And then not only were they able to solve the problem, but everybody was okay. So like even in the Avengers, you had like a fallout from them solving their problems, and then you get into the Civil War stuff. But I don't know like how much fallout they're really gonna have from like they got like everything got blamed on Roxxon, so that they tied that up. And then like Ty's still on the run, but Detective Connors is missing, and we never got any hint of like we assume there's somebody above him in this crime ring that's running the city.
Yeah.
But we have no idea who that could be, and we never got any hint of anything. So it's like, okay, now we're just ready for somebody new. I just don't.
Yeah, they changed houses, and that's it.
Right, it was just like tied up too easily for me for like what it was built up to be.
Right. True.
In like a villain standpoint, so that's my thought on the villains.
Right. Okay. So, like, I wanted when we were like divvying up all the questions, I really wanted to ask this one to you because you're the one who pointed it out. And ever since you pointed it out, like I was watching every episode. This is one of the things that was framing every episode for me. And what you mentioned early on was that uh, the showrunners are doing a good job of giving us a mix of both Tyrone and Tandy in each episode.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't have too much Tandy or too much Tyrone in the early episodes, and I thought that was a really smart thing to notice. And every episode I was like trying to think, okay, so is this more of a Tyrone or a Tandy episode, or are they still giving us the same amount? So what do you think about that? And do you think they did a good job of giving Cloak and Dagger equal time for each episode, like throughout the whole season?
Yeah, so I stand by my thought that they did a really good job of, giving both Ty and Tandy, both Cloak and Dagger, screen time. I mean, they were coming up against a comic book that was called Cloak and Dagger. It wasn't just Cloak and then he randomly meets Dagger one day. They're equally billed as a pairing. So
Yeah.
you look at the story and you say they both have a tragic backstory. They both have issues in the present day that they have to overcome. So they both
Yes.
have that as far as the story goes. They both have their own separate villain to fight against in the present day. So Tandy has Roxanne and Ty has Detective Connors. They both
Right.
had supporting characters who were special to their plots. So like we got Ty with Father Delgado. Tandy, we got Mina. So, a couple more.
Yeah.
A couple of others, but those were like kind of their main ones. And then I think the other important thing, well, before I move on to that, so they had, they both had these issues and they weren't the same, but they were able to take a similar path in how we saw them overcome and how we saw them not necessarily resolve their issues, but grow from them. So we got to see that from both of them in different ways because they're different people, but
Yeah.
Tandy's more in your face and Ty is more subdued. They're both amazing characters, and we got the story from both of them. When they did have scenes together, I think it was really important that they did not outshine one another. They played into each other's strengths, and I think that, I don't think that there was necessarily a scene where I was like, oh, Tandy was better than Ty or Ty was better than Tandy. Like, they were together in a scene and they were helping each other in different ways. They both were able to give to each other.
Right.
So I think they did a really good job of continuing that through the season. And even at the end, when Ty was like, I'm the only one who can do this, I'm going to go alone, I'm the one who has to die, Tandy runs in there and is basically like, who the hell do you think you are? You're not doing this without me. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm invested in you guys as a pair now because I'm so invested in you both separately. I want you to succeed together. I want the show to move on with both of them.
Right. That's yeah, absolutely. I for sure that they did that, and I like the way that they handled the amount of screen time, I guess, for each episode. That they were both doing things, and okay, so they were both characters were always doing something in each episode.
Yeah.
I
There
guess
wasn't like a Tandy heavy episode or a Ty heavy episode. They were both like you got both of them pretty equally, I feel, in every episode.
Right. But there were different, I don't know, weights to what they were doing.
Yeah.
Which obviously, I mean, you can't have them be exactly like that would be really constricting if they had to have the same amount of emotional
drama.
weight.
Yeah,
of drama, right? So like on one episode, your Tandy is infiltrating Roxanne, and Ty is playing a basketball game.
Yeah.
And obviously, one is more important than the other.
But they get it like evened out throughout the episode. So like one episode you see Tandy dealing with some like super heavy emotional stuff with her mom and Greg, and then he dies in front of her and you're like, oh my god. But then a couple episodes later, Ty goes through something very similar with Dwayne. So
Yeah, right.
They both have those. Like neither one of them was kind of like forgotten by the writers. So, you know,
Yes.
when we did get to episode 10 and they started to work together for real, like I said, I was invested in both of them because I got to know who both of them were, and I appreciated the journey of how far they had come.
Yeah, and we saw that it was equally important, and you're right. Like if you step back, I guess, and look at the season as a whole, you see like it totally evened out.
Yeah.
And not which is not necessarily your goal, not, but it's cool that they did that because they have the two main characters, and you want to service both characters equally.
Yeah, I agree. So speaking of characters, I've got kind of a fun question for you. Who from the Marvel Universe, comic books, Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever, who would you like to see appear as a guest?
Oh my God, you have to ask me this. Oh God, everyone.
Of course we
Okay,
have to
so
ask this.
everyone talks about the Runaways, of course.
Hmm.
Which I heard like a news like some news thing that it's probably not gonna happen in Runaway season 2 because they're already, I don't know if they're like already midway through it. So obviously that means I don't know if they would have plotted that out as far in advance, not knowing that Cloak and Dagger would return for season 2. So that's not happening in Runaway season 2. Maybe they can still do it for Cloak and Dagger season 2. Like I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Hmm.
Uh, Especially with this version of Cloak and Dagger, which is younger than in the comics, it would make more sense for them to interact.
Hmm.
Um, the other big one is, and this will never happen, unfortunately, Spider-Man. Cloak and Dagger is so connected to Spider-Man in the comics, and I don't know why Cloak and Dagger are not with Sony. Sony seems to have all the like so many Spider-Man related characters, but
Yeah.
thankfully Marvel somehow kept these two. That would in a perfect world, I would not mind Spidey from the movies swinging over, even like or just a cameo of Cloak and Dagger in the Spidey movies. That'd be great. Uh, but someone brought up Ghost Rider to me, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think I'd be really excited for that. Number one, because they've interacted a few times in the comic books, so there is that bit of a mystical side sometimes to Cloak and Dagger.
Hmm.
They sometimes go to hell, and and Dagger, Ghost Rider is with them for some of these adventures. Uh, and I think a lot of people generally dug the last version of Ghost Rider that we saw, which is not Nicolas Cage. It is another character who got the curse, I guess, from Agents of Shield season 4 or 5. And somebody pointed out to me that I forgot this. A Ghost Rider character went to another dimension. If I remember correctly, that's how he ended. That's how they wrote him off. And his story has a little bit to do with the Dark Force,
Okay.
or the Book of the Darkhold, I believe. So, Darkhold, Dark Force.
Yeah.
You can easily make that connection. And how cool would it be if like in whatever season, Cloak and Dagger are in the looking through of someone's fears or whatever, and then Ghost Rider pops up, and it's like, holy shit,
Yeah.
and Ghost Rider isn't necessarily tied into New York City, so it's easy to see him, riding into New Orleans and them having fun with that character for a while. It makes sense to me. So that's how I'd see it. What about you? Like from what you know of of Marvel and the movies and stuff, would you want them to meet with any particular characters or villains? I guess heroes or villains.
So I'm glad you answered this question because my answer is just super boring. But I want Tony Stark to appear, and I especially just want him to see I want him to see what happened to Peter Scarborough and just be like, yeah, you got what you deserve.
What if Stark buys Roxxon?
I'm okay. And like like wouldn't that be like the ultimate revenge?
Yeah,
Because
and
in the
then like
comics,
I mean,
weren't like
Scarborough.
Roxxon employees responsible for his parents' death? Wasn't that one of the plots of the comics at some point?
I have no idea.
I
I
think
have
that
no
was like
idea.
a random thing somewhere. You know how like I said, there's like 700 plots to all the different comic books, but I think that was
Yeah,
something, and I'm sure someone will correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I
I
don't know.
believe it.
You know, Tony Stark is my favorite, so I would want to see him make an appearance, and that's as in depth as
Yeah,
I go.
or even like they don't even need to get Downey in it. Like they could just put Tony Stark
Okay,
poster.
well, no, I have to disagree with it. No, no, they
You
could.
want your Robert Downey live in the flesh?
They could have just a
That-
poster. If they had like an Easter egg reference to him, I would be so happy. If that happens one day,
yeah,
I'm gonna text you right away and be like, they did it.
yeah. Because if we get Downey, I think that kills off your like half your budget for for.
Yeah. Doesn't he? Isn't he like contractually obligated to them for like the rest of his life, and has already gotten all his money from that? But no.
Yeah.
Yeah, a poster, a reference, a name badge. I would be happy.
Right, right. Sure, it's okay. So let's keep talking about characters. You mentioned earlier that we got to meet and learn so much of the supporting characters around Cloak and Dagger because of the space they were given, and totally agree. Who was your favorite, and who was your least favorite of all the other characters we've met?
This one was hard, so we have lots of supporting characters. We had Melissa Bowen and Greg, we had Adina and Otis Johnson, we had Liam, Avita and Auntie, Mina and Ivan Hess,
Yes.
O'Reilly and Father Delgado, Officer Fuchs, Dwayne. Then we had some villains too. We had Water Girl, who was my least favorite villain. Stan. I wrote him down and then I took him off, and I forgot I was just going to mention it, but you got it. I knew you would mention Stan. And then Peter
Stan.
Scarborough as well. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think my favorite supporting character, God, that's so hard to decide because there's so many good ones.
It's
They all
hard.
no, they all had like so many good moments. Probably, I think. I think Melissa Bowen. No, I think Mina was my favorite. Mina was my favorite, and like the story she had with her dad. And I think it was because I was not expecting her to turn out the way she did from when they started.
Okay.
They could have went like evil scientist with her, and they didn't. She was really just somebody who was like super smart
Right.
and really thought she was carrying on something really good that her dad had done, and that she really wanted to help the environment. So I think Mina was my favorite. Least favorite, my least favorite was Dwayne, and it's because but it's because he was working with Connors
All right.
when he knew
Okay.
Connors killed one of his best friends. Like, and I get the reasoning why and how he was explaining to Ty, like, this life is hard, and like he tried to tell Ty, like, this is not what you want, like you want to be a better person, and it's like, but want that for yourself, Dwayne. Like, you were in it for like the money, and he went against
Yeah.
Billy, who we all loved, and was
Yeah.
working with Connors because he felt like he couldn't get any difference in life, and it's just like, I don't know. I didn't feel like a good connection to him because I had grown to like Billy so much, and I just did not like how he
Right.
went against him like that. So that was my thoughts on those characters. We promised we wouldn't go so long in our hiatus episode, so I'm going to go through the rest of our questions here. Favorite Easter egg?
Favorite Easter egg. I think it was. Hold on. You had your Stanley Easter egg. You had the things you find out later in the episode, like Father Delgado is a drunkard or has an alcohol problem,
Yeah.
and we find that out later. I think my favorite Easter egg was this is silly, but I liked when you see the short what do you call these, the scenes with Water Girl,
Mm-hmm.
like we saw, like there's a hint of her when her car like drives through what do you call this, Greg's office,
Mm-hmm.
and later on in episode 10 we see her like walking by Adina's office. Like I don't know if those count as Easter eggs, but like there's such an impact if you notice it. Like, oh, there she is, and oh shit's gonna go down. Like, so I think that was my favorite Easter egg, if you can consider that an
And
Easter
Stan
egg.
Man's license plate. You have to say that.
Stan Man. God, what a
Yes.
what a douche. What about you?
I think mine was the like Warhol version of Stan Lee picture. I thought that was cool.
Right. Yeah, that was good. That was an interesting take.
Yeah.
Favorite line from the season. What's yours?
Oh, I think my favorite line. So I had a toss between like a funny line and then a more serious line.
Right.
So I think my funny line, and I still remember it, so it must have been my favorite line. I mean, Tandy had a
Right.
whole bunch of one-liners that were really good, but the conversation that Ty was having with Officer Fuchs when he was like, "Haven't you ever seen or read The Telltale Heart?" And Fuchs said something
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
"I'm an abridged kind of guy," and Ty's like, "It's a short story." Like that was a good conversation. But I think
Right.
my other favorite line, I guess it had to have been Peter Scarborough's line in episode 10 when he said, "With great power comes even more
Ooh.
power." Because, like,
Oh.
that's got me. I was like, "Ooh, you're really a jerk." Like, don't take that line
Yeah.
like that. So I think those were definitely that was my fave line.
Yeah, for like
Go ahead.
I just want to say that my favorite funny line was I think Liam was one who called one of the characters resting basic face, which I never
Oh yeah,
forgot.
I forgot about that one. Yes,
That's a good one.
that was fun.
And for serious line, I really love Auntie saying that hopes and fears are the same, because I always think about it. I never forgot it, and there's so many times when I'm like, yeah, it's not even advice. It's just a fact. Like sometimes your fears are your hopes, and they're the same thing, and that's all that there's to say about that.
Yeah.
It's true.
And real quick, what was your favorite song? Since we had discussed how much we love the music in the show and how much the music team did such a good job to help set the mood and everything. So what was your favorite of the songs?
From I think episode 1, I really like Starlight. By Jai Wolf. It has like this vibe. I'm more into vibes than lyrics, so I like the has kind of like a cyberpunk vibe, if anything. And that happens when Tai is looking at or pulls out Tandy's belly slipper that he kept for all these years. So
Mm.
I always associate it with such a powerful moment early in the season. So I love that.
Yeah. And I
What
really
about
like the Decemberist song from Lotus Eaters,
Oh yeah.
like Sons and Daughters. Like that song really it really got me. I wrote that one down, so I remember. And then I can't remember what the song was called, but the one in the very first episode where Ty is like saving Tandy from the car. That song.
Dead in the Water.
Yeah. That was like that got you like
Yeah,
right in the field.
that's a good
So
one.
I do really like that. What character death impacted you the most?
Ooh, character death. Um,
Because we had a lot
so
of
well,
death.
we did. How about I mean the most important, the what do you call this, the when Dwayne died, but mostly because of Ty's reaction.
Yeah, it hurt Ty.
Yeah, he had that powerful scene, and it's like, okay, so you're never gonna forget. Meanwhile, we had like Greg, love you, Greg, and Fuchs, we love you, Fuchs, but they did not have as much. They weren't as important to the story. It's just that simple. They weren't as important to Ty's character, or sorry, to any character as much as Dwayne did to Ty.
So I'm gonna disagree because my death that impacted me the most was Greg, And it's because
Ooh.
Tandy like had this vision of the future with him. She was like, he really
Oh,
could
right.
be like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
father figure to me. Like I could have a
Ugh.
family that I've always wanted, and then that is just taken away from her in a split second. So I think Greg was the one who really. Besides, like you have to include Nathan Bowen and Billy too, because technically they were deaths. So
Yeah. That's not
um,
fair.
I know. I'm sorry, but no, I
Yeah.
would say
Billy.
Greg because of how it impacted Tandy and her hopes and her future.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you probably the most important question.
Hmm.
Did this season underwhelm, meet, or exceed the expectations of the show you had before the season
I was so disappointed in. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, it was amazing. Given everything that we talked about.
Because you
So
had
to have
expectations, I had none, so I had no bar already set, but you had already known these characters and been in love with these characters.
yes, and then at the same time, again, freeform, associated with like the ABC, or was it? Yeah, ABC Family. So I had like all kinds of things, issues going into this show,
Hmm.
and for me, like
Yeah. It's a
from
lot
the
to
first
overcome for somebody who's not familiar.
yeah, true. I was maybe too familiar, or had too many preconceived notions, and you get the first 10 minutes, and it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
everybody agrees the first 10 minutes are like amazing, the directing, the acting, the music, and then you just go from there. The first episode, I feel like a common theme of every of people's discussion of the shows is this show is so much better than the last one, and people keep saying that. But in my head, I'm like, I agree, but the first episode was really, really good.
Yeah,
And
it
so you,
was.
you come into that show, and the way they did it, and they gave the character space. Uh, like you said, the issues that they tackled, I don't know, like it's such a mature, well done show. At the end of the day, that's it, and it goes places you do not expect. It builds characters that in a way that you don't expect from a superhero show, and there are some things plot wise that I maybe disagree with, but in terms of the execution, like
Hmm.
I don't always agree with their choices, but when they made a choice to do something, they did it well, and that is a constant throughout the whole show. And taking nothing away, obviously, from the cast, they were perfectly cast, and the acting on the show is for both minor and major characters is top notch and very consistent, I think. And so overall, I just love the show. I mean, it's not a spoiler to like I would have loved the show regardless, but for me, it is everything, and to see the community, and everything build up from that, and people are talking about Cloak and Dagger in German, or Spanish, and I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, it's crazy. And I don't understand what you're saying, but if sometimes I'll see the word ship or something like ship or Tyrande, I'll click that like button.
Yeah.
So yeah. What about you? Like overall, like did it exceed your? I mean, you didn't have too many, but
Yeah.
how do you feel about
So
the
I didn't
show?
really have like any expectations. I was just going in it with like open mind, just saying like, man, I hope this show is good. And I was so like blown out of the water by how good the show was and how well they were able to bring not just a superhero story, but a story with real human emotion. Like the way that they got us to connect to the main characters, that was my favorite part. Like you could really feel Ty and Tandy as people because they really gave us their history, their background. They brought that to us and gave us that human element of who they are. And with that foundation, and they're able to add those superpowers on top of it. And we've talked about before of how that really helps you take that leap of faith into the superhero realm.
Yep.
So I like it was such a good show. I wasn't maybe even going to say that I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was. Not in any harsh way, but It was just so
Yeah.
much. It was very, very good, and I think a lot of people were surprised by it, and really looking forward to the next season. I was
Yeah.
definitely not shocked that it got a second season. Let's say that.
Yeah. Now I want season 3. Let's work on that now.
Yeah. Okay, so
Starting today.
we have one more question, and it's probably the most important question. And this was asked
I'm ready.
by, so we can both answer this. This was asked by one of our Twitter followers at SipMyT16. When will
Great name.
Tyrandy happen? Yes, it is a good handle. I agree.
Okay, I'll be very specific. I'll say season 2, of course. Episode 4, something will happen. Episode 7, they kiss or something. And end of the season, they get together. So
Wow.
I put a lot of thought into that. What about you?
I wasn't going to go so specific. I will say that I have no idea when they will happen. I think they really laid the groundwork. I'm definitely in favor of Tyrandy for sure, but I'm glad that they didn't throw them together. I don't think I would have liked them as much together if they would have just been like, by episode 3 already together. I like that they really had to get to know each other. I like that they had fights and then still came back together. I loved in episode 7 how they were just, when Tandy was on the phone and she was stuck on the phone talking to her dad, and Ty was like, I'm going to stay here until you don't need me anymore. It was just like, I'm going to keep helping you because I'm not going to leave. And I just think that they're going to be so amazing together when they get there. But I'm glad that they're taking their time to like really make it a meaningful pairing and not just another couple.
Yeah. I just want to point out that one of our listeners at Spawn of Oz mentioned that the way Aubrey was looking at Tandy, and I guess it happened throughout the season, or it developed, like he does this like lip bite thing, and I missed, like, it just didn't register with me. But looking back, when he pointed it out, or she pointed it out to me, I was like, yeah, and that's so good acting, and it does give me the teenage feels, like, ooh, like they're getting together or something like that, But do you think? Can I get you to say that you think it's gonna happen in season 2, or do you think they're gonna like drag it out to season 3?
Oh, I think it'll happen in season 2. But I'm not going to be episode specific. I would say that they'll probably have something major happen by the middle of the season. But that depends on how many episodes. Really? No. It depends on how many episodes season 2 is. If it's 20, then they'll really have some time to play with things. So yeah, it'll happen in season 2. But I'm not gonna guess as to when. And
then they get together, and then they just replay the scene from Dwayne and that girl with the blonde hair.
Yeah, exactly. They'll just bring that back in.
Reuse the footage, and like, why'd you reuse the footage? Well, we had to pay for Robert Downey Jr.'s cameo appearance. What are you talking about?
Right.
No money.
We heard that Kat on the Cloak and Dagger podcast wanted to see Robert Downey Jr. in an episode, so
Yeah, no more special effects. Just imagine it.
I will. I'll give it up for the sake of the show.
All right, that was cool.
All right, those were our questions. We hope you guys enjoyed our season recap in the form of our basically what was most important to you about the season question. But we will be back with more hiatus episodes. We are going to be bi-weekly. On our next hiatus episode, we will actually be on with some special guests. So we're excited to have that coming up for you guys. Thank you, everybody who participated in our Twitter poll. So now we know what you guys want to hear. So we'll be putting out content, especially for character-specific episodes. I think that was the winner of the poll, the character-specific episodes.
Yeah, by a lot.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we definitely have those episodes out there for you guys during our hiatus season that hopefully won't be too long. But please, if there's anything specific that you guys want us to talk about in the show, always shout out. Thank you to everybody who's been, talking with us on Twitter, sharing our posts, Thank you to people who have commented on YouTube, and I'm awful and did not even see the comments until like way later.
Same.
That's totally my fault because we didn't have our settings turned on correctly. So sorry, I responded to all of you now, so we will be checking that as well. But thank you again to everybody, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Make sure you check out the show's description down below so you can follow us on social media. Talk to you next time.